The session is resumed. The majority leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are still tackling the House Bill 3408, Mr. President. The parliamentary status is that for today, we are tackling the budgets of the Department of Finance, the Trade and Development Corporation of the Philippines, the NEDA, Joint Legislative Executive Council, Department of Budget and Management, budgetary support to government corporations, allocation to local government units, contingent fund, miscellaneous personal benefit fund, National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, pension and gratuity fund, unprogrammed fund, Department of Foreign Affairs, other executive offices including the Philippine Sports Commission, the Department of Transportation, the Light Rail Transit Authority, the Philippine National Railways, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, Presidential Communications Operation Office, and the People's Television Network. Hopefully, we can tackle this morning. Later on, Mr. President, I'll inform the body of what is ready for this afternoon.
So what is the first agency for this morning session?
It's the Department of Finance, Mr.
All
President.
right. The Department of Finance, we see the Secretary of Finance, Secretary Dominguez in the hall. I assume we have that. The chair of our Committee on Finance is still not in the hall. So, with the permission of the chamber, we suspend for 1 minute.
Yes, Mr. President.
Session suspended for 1 minute.
Wala pa si Ralph. Congratulations.
Siya sabi mo, sabi mo siya,
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
session is resumed.
Mr. President, to present the budget of the Department of Finance and its attached agencies, I move that we recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Legarda, and to interpolate Senator Laila de Lima.
The chair of the Committee on Finance, Senator Legarda, is recognized to present to the chamber the budget of the Department of Finance and to avail of the period of interpellations. Senator de Lima is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Good morning, everyone. Will the good sponsor yield to just a few questions on 2 to 3 issues pertaining to the Department of Finance. I would assume this would include also the attached agencies of the DOF. So I have also a couple of questions for the Bureau of Customs. Just one question for DOF proper.
Yes, the attached agencies are the budgets of the attached agencies of the Department of Finance is on the floor, and therefore questions can be raised.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our reports have it, Madam Sponsor, that before taking the helm of the DOF, Secretary Dominguez was quoted to be lukewarm to the merger of DBP and Land Bank, as mandated under Executive Order number 1998. That EO number 198, which was issued by former President Aquino upon the recommendation of the Governance Commission for Government-Owned and Controlled Corporations, would facilitate the merger of DBP and Land Bank within a 1-year timeline, with the latter as a surviving entity. And as I said, the new secretary was quoted to be not excited about that. So may we know the rationale behind the reported reluctance of the secretary on the decision to merge Land Bank and DBP? And I understand that the BSP has started to review already the business plan submitted by the state-run lenders, because the merger would require the approval of BSP and the PDIC. So is that still the tack of the new secretary?
Yes. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank our good Senator Laila de Lima for bringing this to our attention, because in the previous Congress, we also, I think there was a hearing on this during the BCC. This was discussed in the previous administration. I am curious myself, and I asked them why it did not push through, because I recall, as chair of the finance last year, there was a budgetary provision anticipating the merger and at the same time the increase in capitalization, which was taken out of the budget. So thank you for bringing it to our attention. However, based on the Department of Finance, Secretary Dominguez and the economic team were not inclined to pursue the merger of the Development Bank of the Philippines and the Land Bank of the Philippines, two state-run banks, as this may, in their view, require legislation, not by mere executive order. Also, clearly the two banks have different mandates. They're built for two different reasons and purposes. A development bank has to give long-term finance to industry, which may require a different set of skills than the short-term finance given by the Land Bank. We know that Land Bank, part of its mandate is to provide access to credit to our farmers, our fisher folks in the rural areas, and Development Bank of the Philippines would be for more long-term finance for industry. And based on those reasons, the DOF had held off the proposed merger of the two.
So I take it that if a law would be passed on that, authorizing the merger, the consolidation, then the economic managers would have no objection? I guess.
The executive, yes, the executive, of course, will have to implement the law.
Will they continue to oppose that?
They,
In the course, assuming a bill would be filed relative to that?
Yes, just like other pieces of legislation in any bill where the executive are invited in our hearings, they give their comments on the proposed measures, and we know for so long as we've been here, for more than a decade, that the executive are not always in favor of the proposed measures. And yes, I hear from the DOF that they will oppose the proposed merger, but it is really up to Congress if legislation will be proposed.
Thank you.
Can the chair intervene just on this point with the permission of Senator De Lima?
No problem, Mr. President.
Is the sponsor familiar with the GOCC Governance Act?
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, if the sponsor is familiar, do you recall that the GCG and the President have the delegated authority to merge GOCCs?
That's part of the mandate of, under the Governance Act, yes.
No, because
And you're saying that it would not need legislation and the President himself can just merge the two banks. Is that what you're trying to say?
that is the law. That is not what I'm trying to say.
I
that
was
is the law,
informed.
and
Yes.
because if it is the policy of this administration not to merge Land Bank and DBP, that is a policy issue which we would defer to insofar as these two government banks are concerned. Insofar as the chair is concerned, there is basis for the merger because while DBP had its, the mandates are different, the fact is on a day-to-day operation, there is no difference in the way the two banks operate today. And it will strengthen the government bank. But I take exception to the opinion expressed that it would require legislation because the authority
Is already in the law.
is delegated to the executive. Yes, it is a legislative function, but we all know as lawyers that you can delegate under proper standards this authority of Congress to legislate. To legislate the merger is basically a function of Congress, but this function of Congress can be delegated to the President as we have delegated it in the GOCC Governance Act.
I take note of the comments of the presiding officer. Yes, perhaps then legislation may not be needed if, based on the Governance Commission law or act, the President may merge this. According to the DOF Secretary, the President is not inclined to merge this, and that is their prerogative.
We are not questioning that.
Yes.
That is why we're saying if that is the policy of this administration, so be it.
So what you're saying is that there is no need
But it should
for
not-
legislation.
But to say that they are not going to do it because it requires legislation, to me is a legal conclusion which has no basis.
Well, that was the... Oh, they did not say it was a requirement. It's a they may require. It was one of the reasons that DOF felt. I am communicating what the Department of Finance said, that one of the reasons, apart from the different mandates of the two banks, was they believed it may have required or it may require legislation, but with the intervention of the presiding officer that this could be covered by the mandate given to the President under the Governance Act, then perhaps the DOF could rethink or revise that position and just say that legislation is no longer needed, and therefore the Governance Commission has the authority, but it is of the belief that the President will not support such a merger.
That's fine. That's perfect. Nothing wrong with that. That is the policy of this administration, that the two banks should not be merged, and we respect that. But we are taking exception to the legal conclusion
Yes.
that the merger requires legislation. That's all that we're saying. Thank you, Secretary De Lima.
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
President, for the additional inputs, very vital. And as a matter of policy issue, of course, is the discretion of the current administration, particularly the executive, but it would help if they can revisit or review the basis for the recommendations as made by the Governance Commission for Government-Owned and Controlled Corporations. Because of the former President
Yes.
Aquino based his decision to issue Executive Order number 198 on the recommendation of the GCG. So
Yes.
it would help if the current administration, if it has not done so, for them to review the recommendations
Yes.
of the GCG.
I am informed that they are open to revisiting it while the inclination is not to pursue it. It can be revisited and restudied.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
If they are inclined, I mean, if they're willing to review it, what we're saying is they do not have to come to Congress. They can do it in the executive branch by virtue of the delegated power that Congress did.
Yes, that is noted, and the DOF will take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. My next question is on the Bureau of Customs. Madam Sponsor, based on the 2015 management letter of COA, there are about 2,800 undisposed containers at the Manila International Container Port.
Customs.
A total of 2,792 containers have remained undisposed for a period ranging from 30 days to more than 25 years. 475 containers contain perishable goods, 126 with no information as to their contents, and 1,607 containers with no schedule yet for their disposal. Obviously, this delays the realization of government revenues from the sale of the containers' contents and its potential deterioration. Also, it appears that 17 containers donated to DOH, DSWD, and PRC remain unreleased, thereby defeating the purpose for which the donation was made. So I'm citing the COA Management Letter Observation number 97. Now, what does the BOC now intend to do with these undisposed overstaying containers? And my next question is there still port congestion in the Manila International Container Port, which has been such a big problem before?
Thank you for that information. At the MICP, a total of 2,792 containers carrying various articles have remained undisposed for a period ranging from 30 days, you're correct, to 25 years, which includes 475 containers loaded with perishable goods, 126 containers with no information as to their contents, 1,600 containers with no schedule yet for their auction or disposal, thereby delaying the realization of revenue from the sale of these articles and may result to their further deterioration. Moreover, it included 17 containers of imported articles donated to the DOH, Department of Social Welfare and Development, Philippine Red Cross, not yet released, have been with the BOC for 222 to 735 days, thus defeating the purpose for which the donation was made, notwithstanding the cargoes are considered tax exempt under Section 105 of the TCCP Volume 1. And according to the
So why are they
UF,
not being disposed?
according to the UF, and it's very clear, they inherited this problem. It doesn't mean, however, that they are not acting on it. In fact, there have been those that have been auctioned already, and 800 still are to be auctioned, and the rest have already been auctioned. There are pending cases, there are legal issues. The others are going to be auctioned, and some have been auctioned. So, in short, action is being taken.
So what's the situation of the MICP? Is there still congestion? What's the level of...
There's no more port congestion as the truck ban in Manila has been relaxed. Trucks are being scheduled to reduce the lineup to decongest the traffic situation.
That is good to know.
Yes.
Now, with respect to the purchase of the 30 X-ray machines, which COA has found to be exorbitantly priced, has there been charges filed? The COA has actually completed its probe and found the BOC guilty of buying
Yes.
overpriced mobile X-ray trucks from a Chinese company.
May I know from the good sponsor or from the interpellator whether, just for my education, who was the BOC commissioner when this was purchased? Are you referring to the present BOC? Was this a recent
2000,
occurrence?
the purchase was made in 2006.
Oh, way back in 10 years ago. So this is, again, an inherited problem.
2006.
Let me ask what is happening here. Cases have been filed. I'm sure.
The COA, because the COA has conducted its probe
Yes.
on the matter, and it has found the BOC guilty of buying overpriced mobile X-ray trucks from a Chinese company in 2006 through a government-to-government loan between the
Understood.
Philippines and China for 7.9 billion, overpriced by 4.215 billion. Investigation showed the mobile X-ray trucks procured from the Chinese firm Noctec Company Limited could have been brought for only 3.7 billion. So it was not only expensive, but were expensive to maintain and are inferior compared with other available machines as part of the findings of
Yes,
the
I am
COA.
clarified now. I believe that the procurement of the 30 units of X-ray mobile equipment for 7.9 billion, was it? Was exorbitantly priced at 4.2 billion as compared to the price of 3.7 billion from other leading suppliers in the international market, contrary to COA Circular 85558. Thus adding burden, obviously, to the national government in terms of the amount of foreign loans contracted and future repayments. Now, what your question is, what was the action taken by the government, by the BOC? Based on information gathered, the two transactions were accordingly entered into through a G2G arrangement between the Philippine government and the People's Republic of China. In that, it was the Department of Finance and the NEDA who represented the Philippines, and thus in all their transactions, BOC was referred to only as an end user. Therefore, it is suggested that the observation be addressed to NEDA and DOF, and charges have been filed. So it's not just overpriced, the capability is also not functional to upgrade the existing machines. Wow. I see. So it's totally lost. Okay. So, kaso. Kinasuhan na ba yung mga bumili? Wala pa. I'm sorry? Yes. I understand that if the information is accurate, because clearly those sitting now inherited this problem from 10 years ago. No cases have been filed yet. And it's the ombudsman. The ombudsman should look into this. And I understand, apart from the overprice, the quality, because technology changes, the quality is not up to par with X-ray machines needed to be utilized by the BOC. Although it can be used, but not to the maximum degree that others at other X-ray machines that can be procured now could be made more useful.
We urge the BOC to check, to verify whether there is a case or not. Because these are very serious findings of
Yes.
the COA, and it's hard to believe that no case has been filed so far. And the next step to consider is to try to blacklist the Chinese supplier.
Blacklist the supplier, yes. I agree with you that an investigation is in order and should have been done in the last 10 years. And second, that so someone sitting on his or her job, definitely not this gentleman sitting beside me. So an investigation is in order and charges must be filed and institutions and persons must be held accountable and the supplier must be blacklisted.
Thank you,
I
Madam
agree with you.
Sponsor. The last point is on the informer's reward. Do we have an assessment with respect to the effectivity of this mechanism called the informer's reward as mandated under both the National Internal Revenue Code and also with respect to, so for both BIR and the Bureau of Customs, the law provides for informer's rewards. And these informer's rewards, if I'm not mistaken, are considered to be trust fund. And existing regulations, if not the law, require periodic submission of reports on the informer's rewards and the specific beneficiaries. Now, I need to know whether this mechanism has been really that effective in terms of stepping up or improving the collection capacities of both BIR and the BOC.
That provision, I believe, is contained in the Customs Modernization Act. And I believe that the proposed rewards for the so-called whistleblowers are pending in the Office of the President, legal.
Do we have the data as to how many so far have been,
We can provide you, yes.
and then whether in the assessment of both agencies, BIR and BOC, this is really a very effective mechanism? Or maybe which would require improvement, if not of the amount, in terms of
You're referring to BIR or to BOC?
both,
Both.
BIR and BOC.
Both are pending in the Office of the President, or just the BOC?
Which are pending, Madam Sponsor?
The BOC. BIR and BOC are pending in the Office of the President.
And what matter, Madam Sponsor, is pending before the Office of the President? What about the informer's reward? Because my question was only...
The informer's reward on the BOC is pending with the Office of the President, legal, and I believe that they can give you the information you need that you earlier requested.
Is that an analysis or an assessment of the mechanism? Because my question is really on the effectiveness of that mechanism. Is that being properly done? Is that being effectively implemented? Are there problems being encountered in the operationalization or implementation of the informer's
yes.
rewards?
Yes. The fact, Mr. President, that it is contained in the newly passed Customs Modernization Act means that it is effective, it is part of the law, and therefore being implemented. That's contained in the present law.
And the informer's rewards are supposed to be approved by the Office of the President.
The payments are
Why are they
pending.
being submitted to the Office of the President? Ganun ba yun sa batas?
Yeah. Oh, this is BIR. I am told that there's a list pending in the Office of the President. There are appeals, and so legal, OP Legal is looking into that.
Thank you. That's all for DOF.
Thank you
Madam
for your
Sponsor.
questions, which are always enlightening. Thank you.
Yes, the chair has a few queries to the sponsor. What is the projection of the revenue program for 2017? And what percentage, what is the amount targeted? And both in absolute amounts and the percentage increase on the tax revenues?
For 2017, this is trillion.
This is 2.3 trillion.
Yes. The projected tax revenues is 2.3 trillion.
2007, 2017.
Yes.
How much is it again?
2.3.
Sorry?
2.313 trillion, Mr. President,
2313. All
which
right.
is 14.5% of GDP.
And over present, over 2016, what is the projected increase?
And it's 9.47% increase in over 2016, the present year.
What is 2016? My records show that it is 2044 trillion.
You're correct.
So that should be about 13%, not 10%. Can we recalculate that?
2.44 and 2.3 is at 9 point, can you compute? Oh, I stand corrected. It's 13.16.
13.16. And in 2018,
It's 2.8 to 1.
it's 2,821
Yes.
million, or billion. And this represents how many percent increase?
In
Over
2016.
2017?
That's 16.1% of GDP, which is 21.9 increase from 2017.
And over 2016, my calculation is that this represents, in 2018, a 38% increase over 2016.
If your calculation is correct, yes.
Which raises the question in my mind, is this realistic? Particularly the projected tax revenue from 2017 to 2018. This is an increase from 2.3 trillion to 2.8 trillion, a 22% increase. Is this a realistic projection? Has this ever been achieved before?
First, Mr. President, I am told that this would be dependent on a more efficient tax administration. And second, on the tax reform package that the DOF hopes will be passed into law.
And the tax reform package will be presented to Congress next year, and the projection is that it will be passed next year?
The target or timeline for that, Mr. President, would be presented to Congress, hopefully passed by 2017. It was presented in 2016, actually. It was presented in September this year. It's been filed. Have there been? It's been filed, tackled, hopefully 2017, and implemented in 2018.
Among the tax reform package would be the removal of the, is it the removal of the VAT exemption on PWDs? Is that correct?
I am told that travel and restaurants will be removed, but the exemption on
I'm sorry,
medicines
what?
will stay.
I'm sorry?
Travel, the non-essentials like travel and restaurants will be removed. Non-essentials will be removed, but medicines will stay in terms of exemptions.
So these are you're saying that the VAT exemption of the PWDs would be removed insofar as travel and restaurant receipts are concerned?
That is the proposed legislation, yes. That is a proposal.
Good luck on your implementation, because that's the most difficult process that you have to go through. But anyway, and on the senior citizens, what is the proposed package tax reform package?
It is the same treatment as with PWDs. The non-essentials will be taken out of the exemptions, but medicines will still be exempted.
Any other reform that will be undertaken? Because you're looking at generating 22% more. That's almost 500 billion, if my calculation is correct. You're looking at a 500 billion increase in tax collection from 2017 to 2018.
Yes, Mr. President. Let me go through a rundown of the proposed tax policy package.
This is personal income tax.
With regards to personal income tax, the intention is to adjust the brackets to correct the income creeping, to reduce personal income tax maximum rate to 25% over time, except for the highest income earners, to maintain progressivity, and to shift a modified gross system to simplify personal income tax. And the offsetting measures proposed in the package would be to expand the VAT base by limiting exemptions to raw food and necessities, and to increase the excise tax on petroleum products, and to index inflation, to increase excise on automobiles. And the mitigating measures are low-income consumers and businesses are already protected by the marginal threshold, which can be adjusted if needed, to use targeted programs to protect the poor and the vulnerable. Their benefits will not be reduced.
Are you through, Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. President.
All right. So anyway, just for the record, you are looking at a 500 billion tax revenue hike from 2017 to 2018, which you say is achievable, even if it's about 22% higher than the 2017 tax revenue goals. Has it ever happened before that we collected 22% more over the previous year? Yeah, the question is, this should be the highest target of increase for
It
tax
is an ambitious target. I join you in that, and I was asking at the OF what are the options, and there really is a need to pass this legislation to be able to fund the infrastructure projects that we discussed yesterday, and to lift the people out of the poverty trap.
All right. Now let's go to one more source of revenue, which is the gaming industry and the PAGCOR. What is the contribution of PAGCOR to our revenue program? And how has it performed over the past, let's say over the past 3 years as a revenue contributor?
PAGCOR income. Ang haba. 2015. This is billion by the B, no? 22. As of 2015, Mr. President, PAGCOR earnings contribution to government is a total of 22,784,522,686.
And so this is 2015.
Yes, Mr. President.
The finance secretary has been there for about 5 months. In the view of the finance secretary, can this contribution of PAGCOR be improved or maximized?
I believe with better coordination, the DOF can collect those who are not paying their due, their share, or on time. And there could be more efficient collection from PAGCOR. And with the construction of the new casinos coming in, there'll be more contributions from the gaming sector, Mr. President.
Yes, those are very general reforms that or steps that the department is looking at: better coordination, better monitoring. I guess the bottom question that I would like to, that this chair would like to know is, what is the view of the Department of Finance in removing the operating function of PAGCOR and limiting PAGCOR to simply licensing, just limiting PAGCOR to regulation?
Yes.
And no longer operating the casinos?
They agree with your proposition to limit the role of PAGCOR to mere regulation and to privatize the operations of the gaming sector.
And again, I would advise the Department of Finance that you do not need legislation of Congress on this.
Did you say there's legislation?
Again, this is delegated to the President, and if the policy is to remove the operating function of PAGCOR and just limit PAGCOR to licensing, because this is a better policy, and this is actually the situation in many countries where there is a gaming industry. Macau, you know, the gaming commission does not operate casinos. In Las Vegas, they do not, the gaming commission does not operate casinos. In Singapore, they do not operate casinos. It is only in our country, as far as I know, that we operate and regulate at the same time. So we are regulating ourselves.
I understand, Mr. President, that not only is the Finance Department in favor of your statement, but they've already started it, the process of privatization, and agree that the regulatory function will only be retained with PAGCOR.
That's very good. And does the Secretary of Finance have a timeline on this?
Yes. 2017, by the third quarter, Mr. President, it is projected based on the timeline. I am told that the process can be consummated. This, of course, there would be study and bidding, evaluation, and by September, hopefully that could be accomplished.
What is the expected revenue that can be generated out of bidding the existing PAGCOR outlets? Or
It would be difficult to give that now because evaluation is still going to be done.
Yes, and but I assume there will be a substantial improvement in our revenue stream from PAGCOR once it is privatized.
Yes, Mr. President.
What about Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Office?
PCSO.
tightening up pati yung monitoring house.
Okay. Yes. Well, as to the PCSO, Mr. President, I am informed that there will be stricter monitoring and an audit of the STL will be done because it is the belief of the DOF that not all earnings from STL are actually being remitted to the PCSO. They have not been totally transparent, and therefore an audit is in order, which is being done or will be done. It's going to be done soon.
Yeah, what, you know, all this monitoring will not be necessary.
The audit, Mr. President.
Audit will not be necessary if you privatize it, just price it properly, franchise
Are you
fees
likely to
being
privatize?
paid, and you don't have to spend a lot of time and effort in trying to monitor whether appropriate fees are being paid.
Yeah. I don't think that there's any plan to privatize PCSO, but they believe that through the audit, they would generate more revenues.
Okay, we'll leave it as that, and let me put on record that by this time next year, this chair will be asking about the status of the privatization of
Of
Pagcor.
Pagcor, yes.
Because that one is really something that can provide us a lot of benefits, not only in terms of additional revenue, but in terms of transparency by privatizing the casino operations, bidding out the licenses in those areas. This representation on a personal plane is interested in having this pursued. I think it's good for government, and I'm glad, and I'll take note of the policy statements of the Department of Finance in today's hearings, sessions, and we will take it up again next year. And we do hope that the Department of Finance can regularly update us on the status of this.
Yes, Mr. President, I informed the DOF that I will have to defend their budget next year, and they intend to have it privatized by then. Yes, same time next year.
The session is resumed. The Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are still tackling the House Bill 3408, Mr. President. The parliamentary status is that for today, we are tackling the budgets of the Department of Finance, the Trade and Development Corporation of the Philippines, the NEDA, Joint Legislative Executive Council, Department of Budget and Management, budgetary support to government corporations, allocation to local government units, contingent fund, miscellaneous personal benefit fund, National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, pension and gratuity fund, unprogrammed fund, Department of Foreign Affairs, other executive offices including the Philippine Sports Commission, the Department of Transportation, the Light Rail Transit Authority, the Philippine National Railways, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, Presidential Communications Operation Office, and the People's Television Network. Hopefully, we can tackle this morning. Later on, Mr. President, I'll inform the body of what is ready for this afternoon.
So what is the first agency for this morning's session?
It's the Department of Finance, Mr.
All
President.
right. The Department of Finance, we see the Secretary of Finance, Secretary Dominguez in the hall. I assume we have that, the chair of our Committee on Finance is still not in the hall. So with the permission of the chamber, we suspend for 1 minute?
Yes, Mr. President.
Session suspended for 1 minute.
ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, to present the budget of the Department of Finance and its attached agencies, I move that we recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Legarda, and to interpolate Senator Laila de Lima.
The Chair of the Committee on Finance, Senator Legarda, is recognized to present to the Chamber the budget of the Department of Finance and to avail of the period of interpellations. Senator de Lima is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Good morning, everyone. Will the good sponsor yield to just a few questions on 2 to 3 issues pertaining to the Department of Finance? I would assume this would include also the attached agencies of the DOF. So I have also a couple of questions for the Bureau of Customs. Just one question for DOF proper.
Yes, the attached agencies are the budgets of the attached agencies of the Department of Finance is on the floor, and therefore questions can be raised.
Wala pa si Ralph.
Sabihin mo, usapin mo siya, Lucy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our reports have it, Madam Sponsor, that before taking the helm of the DOF, Secretary Dominguez was quoted to be lukewarm to the merger of DBP and Land Bank, as mandated under Executive Order number 1998. That EO number 198, which was issued by former President Aquino upon the recommendation of the Governance Commission for Government-Owned and Controlled Corporations, would facilitate the merger of DBP and Land Bank within a 1-year timeline, with the latter as a surviving entity. And as I said, the new secretary was quoted to be not excited about that. So may we know the rationale behind the reported reluctance of the secretary on the decision to merge Land Bank and DBP? And I understand that the BSP has started to review already the business plan submitted by the state-run lenders, because the merger would require the approval of BSP and the PDIC. So is that still the tack of the new secretary?
Yes. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank our good Senator Laila de Lima for bringing this to our attention because in the previous Congress, we also, I think there was a hearing on this during the BCC. This was discussed in the previous administration. I am curious myself, and I asked them why it did not push through, because I recall, as chair of the finance last year, there was a budgetary provision anticipating the merger and at the same time the increase in capitalization, which was taken out of the budget. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. However, based on the Department of Finance, Secretary Dominguez and the economic team were not inclined to pursue the merger of the Development Bank of the Philippines and the Land Bank of the Philippines, two state-run banks, as this may, in their view, require legislation, not by mere executive order. Also, clearly the two banks have different mandates. They're built for two different reasons and purposes. A development bank has to give long-term finance to industry, which may require a different set of skills than the short-term finance given by the Land Bank. We know that Land Bank, part of its mandate is to provide access to credit to our farmers, our fisher folks in the rural areas, and Development Bank of the Philippines would be for more long-term finance for industry. And based on those reasons, the DOF had held off the proposed merger of the two.
So I take it that if a law would be passed on that, authorizing the merger or the consolidation, then the economic managers would have no objection? I guess.
The
if there is a
executive,
law.
yes, the executive, of course, will have to implement the law.
Will they continue to oppose that?
They,
In the course,
they-
assuming